Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Alice Mackay Room at the Vancouver Public Library. My name is Jorge Amigo, and I'm the head of cultural programming here at VPL. Welcome back, 2023. Wow. It's amazing to welcome you back to a new year of Incite. We're very grateful to the Vancouver Writers Festival for this partnership, which brings the most interesting authors to your library. Before we begin, I want to remind us that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And as an immigrant from Mexico and a settler in these lands, I want to express my commitment to learning about the ongoing effects of colonialism in this part of the world. And to share with you that as a public servant, it's really important for me to do sincere action toward decolonization every day in this job. A quick show of hands. Who is here for the very first time in this room? Okay, that's wonderful. We need to do better marketing. Who has been to an Incite before? Okay, awesome. They do great marketing then. And who has been to other library events here that are not Incite? Okay, good spread. So 30% each. So before I pass it off to Leslie, I have a couple of housekeeping notes very quickly. The first one is that if you need to exit the room at any point, there's two doors. They're right there. They're marked exit. Use either of them. They're going to be open the whole time. The bathrooms are right there to the right, so exit and go to the right. It's not the ballet or the opera, so you can come in and out as you please. Just don't make too much noise with those doors. They're very noisy. The second thing is, please take a moment right now to silence your cell phones. You don't need to turn them off. In fact, I encourage you to keep them on and tweet and TikTok and whatever device you like to use, whatever platform. Share, tell the world you're here. But yeah, just make sure it's not a symphony of rings and beeps coming out of your phone. And now, after you've done the thing with your cell phones, please, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Leslie Hurtig, who is the artistic director of the Vancouver Writers Festival.
Thank you, Jorge. And good evening, and welcome everybody to our first Incite event of 2023, presented in partnership with the Vancouver Public Library. We are so glad that you could join us here this evening, and thrilled to be presenting the authors of tonight's masterful debut novels, Jessica Johns and Nicholas Herring, in conversation with Carleigh Baker. And I'd like to give a big shout out to those watching from home or wherever you may be in the digital stratosphere. Thank you for joining us as well. So I would like to take a second to really appreciate our event partner here tonight, the Vancouver Public Library, who makes it possible for us to present events that are free for everybody. A great shout out also to our wonderful bookseller this evening, Black Bond Book Warehouse, who is also our festival time bookseller. Yeah. And thank you also, as always, to our government sponsors, and those include the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the BC Government, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island. And just a reminder that the Vancouver Writers Fest does have year-round programming, and updates on our programming can always be found on our website. But do mark your calendars for every other Wednesday starting tonight through until June, because we will be presenting some really great events here, including on February 8th. We're excited to present Jen Suk-Fung Lee in conversation with Marcia Liederman for Jen's new memoir, which is called Superfan, and it's out in stores now. And actually just announced today, we have the wonderful Métis Canadian author Cherie Dimaline with her new novel, and she's going to be in conversation with Billy Ray Belcourt, and that is on February 22nd. So those are events, just a couple events that you can sign up for now. But we're here tonight for a very particular reason. Jessica Johns is a Neheu Auntie and member of the Sucker Creek First Nation Treaty 8 territory in northern Alberta. She's an interdisciplinary artist and winner of the 2020 Writers' Trust Journey Prize. Bad Cree is her first novel and has been published to rave reviews, including an early starred review in Publishers Weekly, which said, "The novel serves as a window into a world where dreams intersect with waking reality, and where that unseen dimension is as much a part of the life of a tight-knit family and community as bingo, jokes, and video games. It works equally as a spine-tingling thriller and a touching meditation on grief." Jessica also happens to be the former managing editor of the beloved Room magazine, and we are so happy to welcome her back to Vancouver this evening. Nicholas Herring's writings have appeared in The Puritan and The Fiddlehead. Some Hellish is Herring's debut novel, and guess what? It won one of Canada's most prestigious fiction prizes, the Atwood Gibson's Writers' Trust Prize. As the Winnipeg Free Press said, comparisons to the New Brunswick novelist David Adams Richards may be inevitable because of the working class characters and the Eastern geography, but really Nicholas Herring is a new and utterly distinct talent. What Cormac McCarthy did for cowboys and horses, Nicholas Herring does for fishermen and boats in his novel Some Hellish, wrote the Writers' Trust jury in their citation. As the Globe and Mail says, this is an apt comparison, but one that barely scratches the surface of the wild journey Some Hellish takes readers on. Nicholas has made the journey here from PEI. He's never been to Vancouver before, and he has to leave again tomorrow, so let's give him a big Vancouver welcome. And moderating this conversation is the award-winning author Carleigh Baker. Carleigh is Naheo, Cree, Métis, and mixed European ancestry. Her debut story collection, which incidentally is one of my favorite story collections, Bad Endings, won the City of Vancouver Book Award and was also a finalist for the Rogers Trust Award, the Emerging Indigenous Voices Award for Fiction, and the BC Book Prize Bill Duthie Booksellers' Choice Award. Please welcome Carleigh, Nicholas, and Jessica to the stage.
Minute to get sorted here.
I thought we were going to have some really cool walk-up music. That's why I wanted to do that. But we'll work on it next time, Incite. I wanted to start off stage. It was a whole thing. Anyway.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Hi, welcome. Thank you. Thanks for that intro, Leslie. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you to VPL for having us. I'm really excited to be here tonight with all of you and with these two brilliant writers. Nicholas, you're on stage with a couple of Cree ladies. How does that feel?
Yeah, I'm a little nervous.
Yeah.
Should I be nervous? I don't know. I'm always nervous, so...
It's probably for the best.
Yeah, it's probably, yeah.
Okay. Before we get started, I actually want to do, you got those great bios from Leslie, but I actually wanted to take a little moment to do something that I actually learned from Jessica Johns, which is to just talk a little bit about the books and what they meant to me and these folks, meeting these folks ahead of time. So I'm nervous, so I'm going to read, because sometimes when I'm nervous, I just go on, and nobody wants that this evening. But the first thing I want to say about Jessica Johns is that she loves harder than anyone I have ever met. And if when you hear that, you feel a little like, whoa, that's a bit of a surprising, off-the-cuff, vulnerable statement, then good, because that is exactly what reading Bad Cree is like. Bad Cree does not apologize for its deep emotions. In fact, that's what the book's strength is, in my opinion. Its strength is as an honest chronicle of grief and healing, and its strength for the squishy bits. Because sometimes, when you really want to get in there, you need a little bit of vulnerability first. And we're going to talk about the squishy bits later. There's a lot of squishy bits in both of these books, and I loved it. Horror digs deeper, as I said, when readers can feel the characters deeply. Mackenzie, our protagonist, is driven by forces that are both inside and outside of her body. And that's where we stay in this book, rooted deeply in Mackenzie's body, in her breath, in her limbs and her head. And I just think that elevates both the love and the tension throughout the reading experience. Some Hellish, Nicholas, as I was reading this book, I had a song in my head the whole time by a band called Ween, which were pretty badass in my day, but is probably dad rock now, I'll go ahead and admit. And so we don't have Benedict Cumberbatch here to do a dramatic reading, so you get me, Carleigh Baker, just reading just a little bit from that song. I was going to sing it, but nobody wants that either. So got ooze in my pores, my feet are all wet. Got mold in my ears, but I ain't dead yet. Got stones in me bladder, got a crack in me head. When Patty starts crying, this is what I said. And that gives you a sense of the song, called The Blarney Stone. And that's what I had in my head while I was reading this book. Some Hellish is so visceral, I had to actually squint through some parts. But just like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, I persevered because I knew while I was reading it that I was in good hands. And Kurt Vonnegut said something like, you get your protagonist and then you put them through the meat grinder. And Some Hellish stops just short of a meat grinder. That's basically the journey of Herring, a fisherman who literally faces death in order to figure out how to live life. So now enough from me. Thank you for your books. It was just, I said this in the emails that Jessica didn't get, but that reading them both together through the dark, moody months of the winter was an unparalleled experience. It was absolutely wonderful. So, okay, that's enough. It's not the Carleigh show.
That's so nice, Carleigh. Thank you. Oh my gosh.
So let's hear from you, folks. Little reading.
Yeah.
Nicholas,
Should
you
we
wanna start us off?
Should we give it to the people?
Yeah.
I actually don't have I gotta grab a book.
Hey, fortunately,
You didn't bring your own book
I brought a
to
book.
your reading,
There's
Nicholas?
a couple of bites in it. My rabbit gave it a couple of.
yeah.
That's how you know it's good. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
My rabbit loved it.
Should I stand or can I? Just...
Wherever you're
Sit
comfortable.
where you are.
Let's sit.
This is
Yeah, I hate standing for reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Stay with us.
Yeah. I'm not much of a public speaker, so I'm just gonna try to get through this. And
good. You're doing great.
So I'm just going to do the same thing I've kind of done the whole time I've been doing this, which is very brief, and I'll just read from the start of the book, and yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Cheers. Yeah, thank you.
Did I get in the way of your face? No.
No, it's okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. How's everyone doing? Thanks for coming out. Yeah. This is cool. I did my, I'm procrastinating here, if that's not, I had my book launch in Halifax, and there's like 5 people at that, so this is kind of cool. So this is chapter 1. Here we go. For as long as Herring could remember, the abandoned landing crafts sat along the bank of the river that flowed through Irish Montague. No one seemed to want to deal with the thing, this large rectangle of steel, tucked into the sands and grasses near French Creek. Bleeding oils and diesel and rust, a ghostly series of clots into the waters along the shoreline, while skiffs and lobster boats, sailboats and jet skis passed by. It had become a part of the scenery, a landmark that announced the proximity of the harbor just around that last bend in the river. Early one morning in the middle of January, he'd been driving through the village before the plows were out and felt the pull of it, this kind of enchantment of alloys, all oriented and slanted and seamed together. He went to it as if drawn by a lover. He sat in his rig for a time with the lights pointed at the vessel, a cup of coffee on the dash and the heater going at full tilt, a desperate red face lathered with sweat, his skin chapped and dry, hands as white and as stiff as bowling pins. The easterly winds raiding and drifting, embellishing the snows in a kind of tale-bearing, a seething virtuosity. He felt as if he were being cross-examined by the Dominion before him. Herring scrutinized the landing craft, tried to make sense of the little game they were in, its flatness spectral and him an awkward barrel of a man. There was the wheelhouse, its windows smashed, and on the opposite end was a little doghouse composed of ribbed steel that had an anguish to it. A set of ropes stretched loosely from the boat to the trees on shore, these swoops of fibers like the tusks of some mammoth. Herring had a pair of crappy tire chest waders in the back seats. He slipped these on and tucked a Mickey of dark rum into the pouch and walked out over the ice to the boat. He stepped around what had been a meager burn pit and opened the door to the doghouse. It came off its hinges, and he tried to catch it, but it fell and twisted his arm a tad. A pain shot up through him, and he cursed. Inside the shack was a crumpled sleeping bag and a few articles of clothing heaped and frozen in the corner. He kicked at these and unearthed the rhymed Bible. Between the wooden studs on the back of the steel, someone had written something in a manic scrawl with a permanent marker. Herring knelt down and tried to make it out. He thought it said, "A fragment, like a miniature work of art, has to be entirely isolated from the surrounding world and be complete in itself like a hedgehog." He pictured a kind of mutated being, a begrimed hedgehog of human proportion, in denims and a plaid jacket, out here on this little steel island, smoking and drinking shine and eating what it could gather from the waters. A shunned creature, misunderstood by society, confused as to the true nature of its own civility, a kind of friar whose madness was a direct result of its sequestration, its designs apocalyptic no matter the hour. There was only the end, and the end was coming, the furnace of its eyes red like pilot lights in a relentless twilight. Herring sat on a junk of steel and drank his rum. He thought this could be a place just for him, where he could sit and conjecture about the world, drink himself into an oblivion, and then he thought he'd probably never come back to this place. He watched the sun rise and push the shadows up the river. Vehicles rolled over the bridge in town, rubber and snow and frozen asphalt, their moans low and pompous, as if endlessly circling the bell of a tuba. He listened to the shifting ice, the crack of its language, long whimpers and lashes of excitement, and there was a syncopated quality to these sounds, the tires on the bridge and the ice below, that suggested a relationship, some finer arrangement. He'd been thinking about time lately, in the middle of the night while the winds shook the house, wrapped up alone in the bed that Una and he had shared, Murphy too. His toes and fingers so cold that they were glib vexations, smarmy, while the center of him, his guts, were like a furnace. His mind so tired and begging for sleep, pleading, "Give me sleep." And in this kind of delirium, he had begun to understand, to realize and to know that his time was limited, that in fact his time was running out, that he had spent all the years of living he had managed to cobble together, that his line of credit had reached its end. There was a future version of him who was very much dead and gone, even thoroughly forgotten. He felt his mind do a strange thing, as if he were an engine, and the timing belt he required to synchronize and convert his motions was slipping. There was a tick in him that he could no longer avoid. Una was away, gone back to being a McInnes. She had forsaken the herring mantle. He felt all of these things. He felt them deeply, and he didn't know what to do, how to proceed. So that's me.
Thanks, Nicholas. Jessica Johns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carleigh. Thank you, Nicholas. You did great.
Oh, thanks.
We're doing great.
You're doing great. We're all doing great up here. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. This is my first time back in Vancouver since I moved a couple years ago. Hope it's boo to me moving and not to me coming back. And I have a lot of feelings about seeing my beautiful, beautiful friends again, and some family members as well. And I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for being here. I'm going to read a little part of Bad Cree. This is my baby, my first one. And I wrote the first couple of iterations here. So being here and being able to share it here means a lot. And the part that I'm going to share is also quite Vancouver specific. In this part, in this scene, Mackenzie, our protagonist, is alone in and quite isolated in her Vancouver apartment that is inevitably she's going to be rent-evicted from. Many of us can identify with that creeping fear and feeling. And she's thinking about home, and she's thinking about memories of her and her family when she was younger. I'm lying in bed listening to an audiobook on the inner life of bees when I hear the noise from my kitchen. Shook, shook, shook. I press pause on the book, unsure if the sound came from the recording, but then I hear it again, crawling out from the shadows. Shook, shook, shook. And I feel my body tense in fear. I recognize it right away. Coins in an empty tobacco tin, 3 shakes in the darkness. As a kid, almost every night, Cookum, Mosum, Mom and Dad, and the aunties and uncles would gamble together, play poker until the sun stretched out in the morning. No matter where they were, my parents' house, Cookum's trailer, the lake, they'd play. All they needed was a table and a deck of cards. Cookum always started the games. She'd disappear down the hall, and then we'd hear it. The rattle of coins she kept in her player's tobacco tin. She'd shake it as she walked down the hallway. Shook, shook, shook. Nice and slow, a signal and a warning. That gave the aunties enough time to move the kids to the living room, where the blankets on the floor made our beds. Shook, shook, shook. Just enough time for Mom to grab the worn-out deck of cards from the kitchen drawer. Cookum would stroll into the kitchen, shook, 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 shaking the tobacco tin. She'd put on her cowboy hat with the leather band that wrapped around twice, held in place by a silver buckle, a glint from the silver casting beams of light on the ceiling as she tipped the hat over her eyes. She'd put the tin of change next to her, pull out quarters and loonies for her buy-in. She was the resident banker for the house, trading in everyone's bills for coins so they could play too, keeping stock of who owed what. My sisters and cousins and I would watch from pretend sleep while the kitchen glowed with cigarette smoke and the boom of laughter, listen to the flip and shuffle of cards and glasses filling with liquid. We'd watch as a grocery bag full of dry meat got passed around the table through the din, hands stretching to dip their pieces in a brick of butter. Slivers of meat left behind in the yellowed slabs sticking out at all angles. They'd smoke and tap cigarettes into a glass tray, ash growing into hills of snow. Instead of sleeping, we taught ourselves how to play poker and rummy. We practiced shuffling and dealing with our own deck, how to move the cards through our hands to the floor and suck them back up like magic. We recited all the good and bad jokes to each other, copied how the adults threw their heads back in wide-mouthed laughter, and tried to guess how much of a fortune was in Cookum's player's tin that started and ended the night. "Who wants to buy in?" Sabrina whispered one night to a circle of small, chubby faces looking up at her from underneath sheets and sleeping bags. We probably didn't have to whisper. It was hours after the aunties had put us to bed, and the cackling from the kitchen filled every inch and corner of Cookum's trailer. A bright cone of light lit up the floor where the curtain that separated the living room from the kitchen was slightly open, giving us just enough light to see into each other's eager eyes. Tracy pulled out a deck of cards from her blanket, and Sabrina stuck her hand underneath the couch. After a few seconds of fishing around, she came out with a big container of Tums. She gave it a little shake, coins clinking inside. My cousins laughed and held out their hands to Tracy, clumsily shuffling the deck. "We don't have any money," Cassidy said to Sabrina from beside me. She scrunched up her nose and shrugged into her pillow. Sabrina smiled. She was tall and gangly, Her pajamas, which fit fine a couple months ago, were now too tight. She was calloused elbows and was all edges, like her bones were waiting for her skin to shed. She flipped open the whole top of the Tums container and poured out some of the coins inside, pennies, nickels, dimes, and a couple quarters, dusty with white powder, spilled out into the middle of the circle. Sabrina divided up the money at random, making sure each of us had 4 coins. "The game is past the ace," Tracy said, looking like the jack of spades with a sheet pulled over her head. She dealt us 1 card each. "Winner doesn't get anything, but the loser has to go out there." She pointed with her chin to the door leading to the kitchen. A couple of the cousins gave out low squeals, and Cassidy stifled her laughter and moved closer to me. The warmth of her body was like a heater at my side. Tracy and Sabrina shushed everyone and took turns explaining the rules. Shadows rippled across their faces as they spoke, commanding the circle of children around them. I don't remember winning or losing, just playing and eventually falling asleep with cards in my sticky hands and the sound of my family all around me, as if they sprouted and grew from the floor and the walls. Shook, shook, shook. The sound comes again from the darkness of my apartment. This isn't the first time I've heard it here. It started happening about a year after I moved in. Sometimes it will come from the bathroom or right outside my front door. Sometimes I think it's happening in my head. I'll wake up to the smell of Players' Blues and the slap of a hand on a table, flourishing a straight to beat a 3 of a kind. Shook, shook, shook. I'll wake up and rub my eyes, peering from my bed into the dark kitchen, and I swear sometimes I've even caught a glimpse of a silver buckle glinting in the shadows. I imagine Cookham there, in my kitchen or my doorway, signaling to me she's on her way. But she never appears with a deck of cards. She never walks out of the shadows like her death was just a bad joke she's been waiting to reveal all these years. I worry that this place, the solitude of my life in this apartment in this city, has turned my memories monstrous. That loneliness can make once beautiful things terrifying. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica Johns. Oh, I feel like, you can read and read, but there's really nothing like getting to hear. We'll wait. There's really nothing like getting to hear writing in the voice of the writer. Thank you. Thank you both. And I'm so glad that you are all here, and those of you out in live stream land, that you could hear that. I'm not nervous anymore. Now I'm just happy.
We're settled in now.
That's
no,
right.
We're good.
Yeah, no.
Right, Nicholas? We're feeling good.
Yeah. And hey, I know Jessica's a home favorite here, but let's make sure to give Nicholas lots of love as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk. Let's talk about land and sea. Let's talk about place. So this is a big relationship to define, obviously, our relationship to land, and I feel like it can change and grow with time. But in the context of your novels, how are you engaging with land, with place, whether it's where you come from or using place in a more abstract sense? Let's start with Nicholas.
Jesus. Well, that's a good question.
You should have read the emails I sent, Nicholas.
Yeah, no, I did. I did.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I don't know how you answer that. Well, what's the saying? Like, geography determines your fate. So I think I'm sure we can all speak to this. Like, where you live determines your everything. It determines your life. So yeah, I think any story we tell ourselves is going to be about what's under your feet, and So I mean, obviously, land and sea, PEI. It's kind of the Maritimes. It's kind of inevitable. Like if you're writing about people, I mean, from PEI, it's a very small place, and you kind of have to talk about those things. I couldn't imagine writing a book that didn't talk about those things. I know for me, like part of the project was I wanted to not write a city book. So not write a book that was like, hey, I live in Toronto and I ride the subway. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
I don't know, I feel like there's a dearth of books about Toronto. Maybe
Yeah.
we could use a few more. Yeah, maybe your next book.
I don't want to. No, well, I don't want to.
Maybe you didn't. Maybe you don't know about the podcaster who took a shot at Vancouver recently.
Oh, no,
maybe you
so-
do, but
Yeah, no, sorry.
yeah, no. Thanks, Nicholas.
There's space for everybody. So, but I feel like there's lots of Toronto novels and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, feel like you're right. Thanks, Nicholas.
Yeah,
Jessica.
Yeah, so I mean, my the locations in the novel are very significant. They occur very specifically in Vancouver and also in Treaty 8 territory in High Prairie. And I think that, I mean, for Mackenzie, a big part of, this thing that she is confronted with is that she thinks a lot about the question of good and bad, and or like good and bad, and kind of in relation to herself specifically, she asks her aunt at one stage, am I a bad Cree? Because she thinks these things happening to her are because of some inherent badness. A shame that doesn't belong to her by any means, but is there nonetheless. And I think the thing that I hope, Mackenzie sort of learns as she does go back home, where she has been separated from for a number of years, is like she starts to really think about her relationship to place. Like when she was living in Vancouver, she wasn't really living in a good way. She wasn't in community with people. She wasn't really considering her place there. And that, she had a self-isolation because of that, apart from one friend who, tethers her to the world, really. And when she goes home, and there's some stuff I can't say because I don't want to spoil and I don't want to ruin things, but for people who haven't read it yet. But when she goes home, she's confronted with also how she's there too, how she is in relationship to the people there, to her community, to her family, and she's held accountable for a lot of hurt that she really hurt her family in a number of different ways. And specifically, she goes back to a land and a place that is her home, that is literally her territory, that is very vastly changed from when she left it, even just a few years prior, because of settlement, because of farming, of the oil field industry. And that is very confronting as well. So those are all things that she grapples with, within the novel, quite extensively.
Yeah, thank you. I want to sidestep a little bit here too, and because when you were talking, Nicholas, I did think when you mentioned that, this is where I'm from, and this is sort of what's expected to me to write a book like this. I'd been thinking about this. I wanted to ask about expectations, because in different ways, but I feel like in the publishing world, there is an idea that there can be a very heavy expectation on what a novel from Atlantic Canada looks like and should be. And I also feel that Indigenous literature, there has been for years this idea of what Indigenous literature, and it persists, what it looks like and what it should be. Do either of you have any thoughts on that? And like, was that in your mind as you were writing the book? Were you thinking about that or not?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think for me, obviously, I was writing a book about. I wanted to throw my hat in the ring to write a book about, the sea, and so I was sort of, I don't know, I was as conscious as I could be that I was, sort of working within a tradition. I suppose in a sense, like it is kind of, it's kind of cliche, I suppose. Like there's you have the sea, and obviously, so what comes to mind? You're going to have, it's fishermen, so there's going to be drinking and bad language, and so I was nervous about all those things because I didn't really know what I was doing, and I still don't know what I'm doing. But I was trying to find that balance between like this just becomes old hat and trying to do my own take on it, I guess. So I was very nervous about all that, actually, I have to say. So I think I kind of pulled it off a little bit. I don't know. Yeah.
Feels like you were successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm bad for telling really bad jokes, but do you guys know what a pirate's favorite letter of the alphabet is? Or, no, it's not R. It's the C. Yeah. So,
I was going to answer, then I was like, I know this is going to be wrong, so
Yeah.
I won't write.
Led you astray and then brought us back.
Yeah. Sorry about that, but Anyway, so.
No, I mean, I used to have something taped to my, probably should still, back in the days of just not having a laptop all the time, that said, I wish I knew who said it, but art is a unique expression of a common experience. And I really like that, because no matter what, what the sort of the cultural expectations might be, it's sort of what we bring to it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not clever enough to write something like, like a Station 11 or something. So
doesn't that amaze you that people can make stuff up out of nothing?
Yeah.
Those people are amazing.
Yeah, it's really annoying.
Yeah.
So,
Jessica Johns, expectations, publishing, literary.
Yeah, I would say so. When I was writing Bad Cree, I think that particularly this short story version, I definitely had those things in mind of expectation and what Indigenous lit is, and also what literary fiction is, what good fiction is. I keep doing air quotes today. And that really informed the short story, I feel like. And, I was doing my MFA at the time that I wrote it, and I feel like there's a bit of snobbery in the academy around writing genre. And it wasn't until I started expanding it into the novel that I just moved away from, I really leaned into writing what I really like. And I love horror, and I love fantasy and sci-fi. Those are things I've always read and always loved. And so I leaned into that, and I also leaned into, I use a lot of really common, horror tropes. Dreams are used quite often in horror, and, I think, especially when we're writing into a space that is very, speaking of, that's just written stories, but oral histories go back, for thousands and thousands of years. So there's no such thing as something new, really, in terms of when we talk about cliche or whatever. But there are new ways to tell these stories, even that being said. So I use, a lot of these similar tropes, but I use them in ways that make sense to me and make sense to the specific world I'm writing into. My one example for that in Bad Cree is that very common, dreams are used in horror. We can think of Friday the 13th, or is it, whatever one where the guy comes from the dreams and kills people. Freddy? Yes, thank you. And the main tension in the story is that people don't believe, the people are experiencing these dreams and no one believes them. So most of the movie is just them trying, usually women or femmes, trying to convince, whoever that these things are happening. They don't believe her, and that escalates until, a bunch of people die. And that's the tension. And I use dreams in Bad Cree very significantly, but that's not the tension. As soon as Mackenzie tells her family, these things are happening to me, they're like, oh shit, that's bad. We don't know why it's happening, we don't have the answers, but we're going to help you figure it out. And then the tension instead becomes figuring it out. So anyways, that was a bit of a tangent because that didn't really answer your question at all. But yeah, there are certainly expectations, and I really tried to, particularly with the book, not think about those expectations and instead wrote what was true to me. Yeah. And I let those anxieties come in after.
Yeah.
For fun.
As a treat.
As a little treat to me.
Can I butt in?
Yeah.
I read an interview. I read an interview with you where you said, I think at your MFA, and you had a prof say oh, don't do dreams.
Yeah.
And I had the same thing when I was at Toronto, doing that MA in creative writing. The guy who was working on my book with me, I had all these dreams in my book, and he was like, you got to cut them out. Nobody likes reading dreams. And I was kind of like, well, go get stuffed. And
I like that response. Yeah, that's good.
So so that was years ago, like a decade ago, but I never forgot. And so I peppered this thing with dreams. And it's interesting, they're kind of boring. I don't know. Maybe most people think they're kind of boring, but I always enjoy reading about dreams. So it's not for everybody, but yeah, dreams are so good for you for get stuffed kind of a little bit. Yeah.
I like your I love your response to him. I didn't have he said it to classroom people, so I didn't have a response. But I like that you stuck to your guns with that too. Yeah. I like reading about dreams also. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there we go.
Yeah. No, hearing about dreams is boring when someone comes up to you and says, "Yeah, I had this dream, and whoa, we were in the desert, and there was a car there." And then look at you and you're but in the hands of storytellers, that's I was in that class with Jessica Johns where we, because I mentioned that someone had said that to me too, that they say that you shouldn't talk about dreams, and Jess was like, who said that? Let's go get him. What do you mean? That's not true at all. And both of these stories look, and a lot of my questions actually, I was saying in the green room there, that where the important people sit, that's right, yeah. I saw a lot of similarities, very different stories, but I saw a lot in common with these books. And same thing, the way that dreams were handled was just masterful. So, which perfectly leads into my next question. Life, death, and the in-between space.
Liminal.
Yeah,
Carleigh doesn't like the word liminal, so I'm going to say it.
So pretentious. In the liminal space. Sorry, if you're a liminal fan, come and get me after the show. But that in-between space, liminal as it is. So such different stories, and yet both of you have taken a significant look at the space between living and dying in your novels, with approaches that I felt just fearlessly push reader expectations of what is real, what is truthful, and what is believable. People keep using. I feel like there's sort of a we're going to talk about all the terms that I hate, but magic realism is I feel is a specific term for a specific genre of writing. But there's also in this sort of post-truth world that we're in right now. I feel that both of your stories push into the this is what happened. This is my story. This is what happened. So. Can you tell me about that, about pushing the boundaries between life and death and finding that in-between space, what it looked like, don't crack your page, what it looked like to create those spaces?
Oh, yeah, me first this time, Nicholas.
I can go. Yeah.
No, I got it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll go. Yeah, so I think that a lot of my book deals with grief and loss, and Mackenzie and Mackenzie's family, the very different trauma responses they all have to their own grief and loss. They have lost people very, very important to them, and they all deal with it differently. And I think that, a lot of that came from this was sort of an activity in doing a lot of this work myself too, thinking a lot about grief and loss, thinking a lot about death and what that means for Cree people, because we have very specific stories about death. And I loved the idea of, though two very important family members to Mackenzie in the book have died, they're still in the book. I really loved the idea of her still being able to interact with them, and they're still very much major characters in the book. She interacts with them through her dreams, and that's the fact that they're still able to live in that way and still be there in that way, I think was just a significant way of I guess talking about the fact that there isn't really there is a liminality, sorry to use the word, but there is a liminality to, when we speak to our ancestors and when we have those conversations in our dreams, that's actually happening. And they're actually there, and that might not mean they're here on this earth, but they're there. And so it was just a way of writing that reality into existence in Mackenzie's world.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Nicholas.
Yeah. I when you were speaking, I was thinking of has anyone ever read Rockbound by Frank Parker Day?
No.
No? Oh wow, no. Okay. It's a great book. I think that won the first Canada Reads or whatever, so I'd highly recommend that. But there's a great scene in that book where a character, they're on the south shore of Nova Scotia, and there's a scene where the main character, or the buddy of the main character, he's the lighthouse keeper, and he's drinking as you do, and there's a scene where he has a conversation with the devil, and so he's drinking, and you're kind of reading it, and you're thinking oh, what's going on here? He's interacting with the devil, but then the devil comes out of the corner, this darkened corner of the room, and it's so well done. And I don't know why I was mentioning that, but there's another, and Michael Crummey's Galore too. There's I don't know if anyone's read that one as well, but there's this Catholic priest, and he's trying to sleep with this woman, but her husband is in the room, and so he always ends up just talking to this guy the whole time, but it turns out he's just the ghost of the guy. He died years ago, and I always find that stuff very, very intriguing. I'm not sure how that applies to my book. Other than So I heard it said years ago that there's only really 2 stories we ever tell, and it's the crucifixion story and a resurrection. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good. I'm going to write that down. And so I wanted, with my book, I wanted to tell both of those. So the first half of the book is kind of a guy crucifying himself, and then the sort of the second half of the book is him trying to resurrect himself. So that's what I was trying to do. I also viewed my story as like a transformation story. So a guy like who's kind of like who's living but very kind of dead inside, and he wants to learn how to live while he's alive. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not so much about ghosts in my book, but yeah, no, that's cool stuff though. Yeah. So you should read Rockbound and yeah, and
Read
yeah.
our books first, and then you can read this Rockbound.
Yeah.
You can fit 'em in.
Rockbound's really good. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, Herring's journey was I'm no spoilers. I'm not going to deliver any spoilers. You can if you want, Nicholas. But it was. I mean, at that moment, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This. How could this possibly happen?
Yeah.
And I wondered at that point if the whole novel was going to become about explaining how this could possibly happen, but it didn't, which I
Right.
thought was so cool. Instead, it was like, yep, this happened. This thing that just defies nature and science happened, and that's it. And I think there's a real bravery for anyone who's ever been in a workshop and been told like, yeah, I don't really feel that that's very
That's
believable.
not believable.
Yeah, yeah, like that's like fiction is bound by what is believable.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite a journey he goes through.
Yeah, I was very. I don't know where that came from, but I knew I knew when I started writing the book that I wanted to make like the crux of the book. I didn't want it to be in the book, which is like a terrible idea. And then I knew I wanted to make it as unbelievable as possible. And I don't know if it really works, but I get like when I submitted it to Goose Lane, like they never said anything, so I was like,
Yes.
I guess it works. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
I thought it worked. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Body horror. Let's talk about body horror. So, I mean, I checked Goodreads, Nicholas, and while your book doesn't technically sit in the horror category, I didn't read any of the reviews. Don't ever read the reviews
Jesus
on
Christ.
Goodreads.
Yeah. Please
But it doesn't technically sit in the horror category. You both have chosen to work with body imagery that is gritty, visceral, and grotesque at times. So tell me, this is a selfish question because I could never write anything like this, and I was like, how did they do this? Can you tell me about the choice to use this imagery and what it's like imagining and writing it?
Well, my Google search was not like what do veins look like before they're cut? Like what is there's a bit of body horror in Bad Cree, particularly towards the end. And I chose to use it because I love it. I love reading books with body horror. Eden Robinson is a huge, like I love Eden Robinson's work, and she uses body horror a lot. It's scary. Thank you. It's scary. It's just the sort of grotesque nature of it is really fascinating to me. So that is why there's no deep reasoning for it other than I was just like, I think this is going to be a cool scene and I'm going to write it like this. My process for it was a lot of weird Google searches and reading things up about the body and crows' bodies and how they, and their bones. It was, I learned a lot. So.
Yeah, thanks. Now, Nicholas.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like, well, I don't know. I don't want to sound dramatic or anything, but sometimes I do feel like, I'm hoping everyone can kind of relate to this, but sometimes I wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, Jesus, you again? And I just feel like kind of if you really want to like be honest about it, like being alive on some days is kind of like a horror show. Like like our bodies are so weird and gross and like I mean look at me like yeah like it's so I wanted to write about that because I know about that very very intimately and Hilary Mantel, she writes really her early books before like the first 8 books she did before the trilogy. She writes like very very well, like very very well about like how horrifying it is to like just like look at your flesh and be like, oh man, like what's gonna come off me today, and. So I would recommend checking out the Mantel books before the trilogy. Yeah, she's very good at. Yeah. So I think if you're just trying to write about like, I was trying to just cram as much as I could into my silly little book, and so I wanted to make sure I kind of hit that note. Like, yeah, because somebody, my buddy, he finished the book and he was like, yeah, there's like a lot about teeth in here, and I was like, oh shoot, I didn't know that, but there is a lot about teeth, so I'm very self-conscious about my teeth, I suppose, and so that's in the book, and yeah, there's like lots of missing teeth, and yeah, so I feel like that's kind of terrifying to have like a body, and it's you're just slowly decomposing. Not to like, yeah, we're taking a turn there, but it is kind of true. Like, yeah, it's like, I think for me personally, like about 10 years ago, I remember it was a Saturday night and I was reading and my right eye started like twitching, like, and it was a bit weird. I never had anything like that, and I woke up the next morning. And I didn't know about I didn't know about it. I thought I was just having like an allergic reaction or something. But like I had Bell's palsy, so like the right side of my head was like totally paralyzed. And I was actually going to band practice that day, and I got into a car accident because I couldn't blink because my friggin' eye, like my eyelid wouldn't open, and so my depth perception was off, and I actually rear-ended this guy, and that's a whole story. But that was actually like that was terrifying. I had like 6 months, like half a year, where I was like doing steroid treatment, and I remember going into the doctor, and he's like, "Oh, it's a good thing you got in here, like, because I couldn't blink." So actually, my eye was open, and I couldn't blink. So he's like, "It's a good thing you came in here when you did, because you're about to lose your eye." And I was like, "Holy shit!" Sorry, I was like, "Holy shit!" And yeah, and. So I did steroid treatment, but the thing that was heartbreaking, I remember this too, I asked the doctor, I was like why, like why did this happen to me? And he was like, we don't know what causes it, and we like you just take steroids and hopefully it'll go away. And that was terrifying. I remember too, I was like trying to work, like I go to work and I'd have to like suck everything out of like I couldn't eat because half my tongue was paralyzed, and I had to suck everything out of a straw. Like it was brutal. So. That was a tangent, but yeah, bodies are terrifying. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Sorry.
Point proven.
Yeah. So
it's also funny, like just saying that your friend was like, you talk about teeth a lot. It's funny the things other people will notice that about your own writing that you don't.
Yeah.
Because I had the same thing happen with the gut. I was like always referencing guts and the gut in my writing, and I didn't realize that until someone pointed out, and I was like, oh, I'm obsessed with the gut. Jay's nodding, because not a surprise to anyone, because I talk about gut health all the time, but yeah, it's kombucha, baby. So it shouldn't have been a surprise at all, but yeah, it's so interesting the things that like we go to and we don't realize we use all the time.
That's got to be one of the best things about when folks read your work and point stuff out, and you see things that you're sort of you're working from some sort of inner place, but you're not actually thinking about it while you're writing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very cool. Yeah.
Which I think is a good.
You're like, I don't want to ask that. No, not that one.
Yeah. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask this. You kind of answered this already, but I'm kind of kind of want to hear about that. No, hang on. I'm just going to switch over to histories. Let's talk about histories. So of course, not all writing is autobiographical, despite the fact that how many times have you finished a work and someone's like, was that you? Was that you in that story? But I do feel like it's pretty safe to say that in some ways, even if it's, in a more abstract way, that you both have written from some lived experience in your work. So how do you feel about self-disclosure and using yourself or your community stories in your writing?
I mean, a lot of, I feel like, I think you and I, Carleigh, have talked about this before, where we jokingly said fiction is just thinly veiled nonfiction. And I think that it's fair, certainly, to say there are a lot of elements that in Bad Cree, that, I've pulled from my own life a lot. This is set predominantly in Vancouver, a place that I lived, and High Prairie, a place where all of my family is from. And, the aunties are like a mishmash of all of my aunties, sort of, bits of them thrown into people. Some of the memories and stories too, I'm pulling from my own life in a lot of ways. And the thing that keeps it very firmly in the fiction realm is that I'm not disclosing anything that, I shouldn't culturally. I'm not disclosing anything that I shouldn't, I'm not. The messiness that I put in there is, or any drama is exciting stuff that I make up, So I'm careful with that. And then I think when you speak from your own experience, and when I say your own experience, not necessarily, you don't have to have the experiences to know the feeling of, grief. You don't have to have those things to know the experience of loss or love and joy. And that's what I imbued in there, to keep that sort of the genuineness of what happens to these characters, even though it is vastly different from my own life.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Nicholas.
Yeah, I think for me, I just thought it was kind of funny to write a book, and the main character's name is Herring, and I have to say, the book was originally called Herring, and so at a point during the editing process, I got an email from Bethany at Goose Lane, and she's like, "Listen, we can't publish a book of fiction where the title is going to be the title page is going to be Herring by Nicholas Herring. Nobody's going to know what this is, and it's just too weird." And I was like, "Ah, shit." So, but for me, I suppose it is a little weird that I wrote a book where the main character's name is Herring, but I don't know. It was a way for me. I jokingly said ages ago that I'm too cheap to go to therapy or whatever. So I'll just write a book, I guess, and that's kind of what I was doing. I was like, why don't I just write a book about me? And virtually everything he thinks is stuff I've thought, and everything he says is basically stuff I've said. So yeah, so it is kind of weird, but I'm a weird guy, so I guess I don't know. Makes sense.
It's the beauty of writing. You get to pull. Every little thing is potential fodder, right?
Yeah.
No, I know. I opened your book to read it and saw the name and immediately Googled you again to see if I'd missed that you were a heavy-set fisherman who had faced death.
Right,
and
yeah.
Did I miss that somewhere? But no.
I lost a bit of weight, but
yeah, thank you. Okay, now it's time for your questions. Thanks very much. And I've got some to start us off. If there's, I hope you've been thinking about your questions for these brilliant writers. I didn't wear my glasses this evening, so I'm gonna just squint at y'all. And do you have any questions for these writers? Now I'm squinting.
I'll,
Yes.
Both you guys attended creative writing class or school. What was the most valuable piece of education that you took from your time at school? Learning about creative writing. Like, what would you, one thing that you could say you took from all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Can I go?
I'll allow it.
Yeah. The most valuable lesson I learned, and this is true. So I don't want to be like, I don't want to come across as like flippant or anything, but I learned that it was like it was a waste of time. So, yeah. So there you go. I'm out.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Yeah, yeah.
Jessica?
Yeah, I don't think that there was anything in the actual class. What the classes gave me, or what the program gave me, I guess, was time. So because I had, for this creative writing class, I had to produce a short story because I was getting marked on it. I wrote it because I had to, and it gave me time to write, which is something that, is a resource for writers. But more than that, I agree with Nicholas. It is not necessary at all to become a writer. A lot of, the barriers that I came up against in academia were not great for me as a writer personally, and there was a lot of unlearning that I had to do when I left. But the thing that I did create while I was there, which you also don't need to do, or you don't need to do an MFA to be able to do this, but this is something that happened to me, was that I got to be a part of a really wonderful writing community. There was, the cohort of people that I met and became wonderful friends with, that was the best part of the program, and it had nothing to do with the university at all.
Do you mind if I ask you, because you're from Vancouver, where would you find a community of writers within Vancouver if you're looking to be around this kind of people? Because you lived here for so long. Is there a place that you can go that you can find this kind of thing, like from your own personal experience?
Honestly, just attending events like you're doing is the thing that I would say to do, because being a part of the community is like, you have to think about more than just what you're getting from it. Like, how are you supporting local writers? How are you supporting local talent? And becoming part of the community that way, I think, is the best way to do it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, hard agree. Yes, is that you, Jay?
Yes.
Jay Simpson. And then we'll hit you in the front here.
I'm Ingrid Drew. Thank you so much for this reading. This question is more geared towards Jessica, not to show favoritism, but she should be here. My question is more specifically about the canon of Indigenous literature in so-called Canada. And it's about the responsibility of a writer, but more so what led you to showing some of the dynamic of Mackenzie's familial relationships in the kind of very honest lens versus the way that non-Indigenous people hope to perceive Indigenous families? Because you have a perspective that is, as a reader, an Indigenous reader, very, very vulnerable, but very, very true, but then also very generous. So I'm very curious in what led you to go that route, but also knowing who you are, though. But I asked this question more for like the white audience members.
Thank you, Jay Simpson, for that question. I think that, what I really wanted to show was I wanted to go beyond. There are very specific and a long history of stereotyping Indigenous characters in writing, and I really wanted to to answer that with Indigenous characters that are really complex. For example, when Mackenzie calls her aunt, when she realizes these things are happening to her, she sort of has this this idea that her aunt is just going to have all the answers. And she calls her and she tells her what's going on, and she waits anxiously on the phone, and her aunt just goes like, that's really fucked up. Like, she's like, what do you want me to say to you? Like, Mackenzie kind of does this thing that a lot of non-Indigenous writers have often done, is where they go like, oh, here's going to be the all-knowing Indigenous character, and Mackenzie falls into that trap also. She goes, oh, well, she must know. She knows Cree. She must know what's going on, And her aunt goes, I have no idea what's going on. That's weird. But what was important that I wanted to show was that, the fact that the auntie is the first person that she calls is very significant, because that is a relationship that is incredibly special. And also, the aunties are not without complexity either. They make mistakes in the novel too, and they also don't know what to do, but the first thing they do is go, we don't know what's going on, but we are going to figure this out together, however that looks, even though there is complexities in their relationship, even though there's tensions and, their own conflicts that they need to sort out. And in particular, I wanted to show, when they got back to High Prairie and they're trying to figure this out together, the ways in which they figure that out, I think, is very different to, particularly in horror. And I'm thinking of Stephen King, who loves to use like Indigenous burial sites and stuff like that. And they go to books, and they go to, in contemporary horror, they go to the internet. And Mackenzie and her family do those things, and they're helpful to a point, but they go to community. They visit. Like, that is how you find information. You visit with people. And you find out the very specific history of where you are. And I felt like showing the dynamic ways that they interact, the relationships that they have, was just like, the truest thing that I could do. So that's why I was generous in that way. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Daz. And you had a question here.
So my question is to both of you. This is your first novel. So I believe I read something about how it took you 7 years to finish this novel or something like that. I don't know about your equals. But what was the most valuable thing that you learned from writing this book?
Go for it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the most valuable thing I learned, the most valuable thing I learned writing the book was, so writing a book or like any venture like this is kind of a mad thing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You're up in your room by yourself, like. I think every day I was just like, I'd be like, I'd write for a little bit, and then I was like, this is terrible. Like, this is truly terrible. And why am I doing this? This is such a colossal waste of time. And but I'm too stupid to quit, and so I kept going. And for me, it really, and I don't want to sound like grandiose or anything, but it really was like an act of faith. Yeah. For me, it was really like, I'm gonna be a monk for the next couple of months, and this, just because this means a lot to me. And I will say, when I was doing the first draft, when I typed that last sentence, the thing that I'd been looking for, and I didn't know what it was, but I was chasing it, and this is true. Like, I felt it but it was just like. And then it was gone. And I was like, you son of a bitch. but it was worth it. But it was worth it, and I swear to God, I knew it was worth it. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing too is like this is my first book, and so I had the idea roughly for this story when I was like 16 or 17, and I was at school, and I just popped in my head like just kind of I wanted to write a story about a guy. Originally, the story was going to be about a coal miner in Glace Bay, and he gets trapped underground, and he's rescued like many days later, and he's changed. And I thought that would be an interesting story, but I never got around to doing it. And then I was down at the wharf one day, and a guy I was working with, his cousin had just died. He was fishing out at the North Shore, and he just died like the second day of the lobster season, and he just fallen over the back of the boat. And and they never found him, and I was thinking, holy shit, that's probably what I should try to write about, not the coal miner. And so the book came kind of, they say like you have your whole life to write your first book, and then you got like 2 years to do your next one, right? So, but really like it came hard and fast, and I didn't really try to overthink it or anything. So I was just very grateful that I was there, just trying to, I don't know, put lightning in a bottle or whatever they say. But there is truth to that. So, I mean, there's like a million reasons you don't have to write a book, right? Like it's like nobody knows me here. Like nobody gives a shit. Like nobody was like, so if like when's Herring gonna write this book about himself? Like that wasn't a thing. But I was like, screw you. Like I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah,
So,
nice.
Yeah. So-
I went ahead and took 7 years before my next book, so take your time.
Yeah,
take
I'm
your time,
not-
Nicholas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jessica.
Yeah.
So writing back Cree took about 5, I would say. And that's from when I wrote the short story to what it is now. And the reason why it took so long is because I have written this book 70 times. This is the 70th iteration of this book that I've written 70 times. It went through so many manuscripts. It is so different from the original manuscript when I first built it out. And it took time. And by the time I finished it a year ago, I was so sick of it. I was so sick of reading it. I was done with it. I've had a bit of a break from it now where I'm excited about it again, so it's fine. But it took so long because I'm also a slow writer. Like I don't write thousands of words a day. If I make 500 when I was writing at, the most consistently every day, that was huge. But, it took time because it needed to take time. Yeah. Was that your question?
What did you learn? Yeah.
Oh, what did I learn? Oh, take the time that you need to take to do it. Because I could have, we could have had an earlier publishing date as well, and so it could have been published earlier, and I could have rushed it, and I didn't want to do that. I did want to take my time with it, and I'm really glad that I did. Yeah. So yeah, take the time you need to take. Yeah.
I will say this is an indication of just how like stupid I am. But when I finished the book, I went to Google, as you do, and I was like, how many words is The Great Gatsby? And it told me like, I don't know, I can't remember. I think it was like 80 something. And then so I looked at my Word doc at the bottom in the left hand, and I was like, oh, I got more than that, so I'm good to go.
We're good.
We're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
All right. Let me just check with Jorge over there. How are we? Are we giving me a thumbs up? Yeah. Okay. Let's take another question. I think I saw a hand. Yes.
Real straightforward question for Jessica. Where did you move to after you left Vancouver back to High?
High Prairie, but no, I live in Edmonton now. Yes, so I've lived there for the past 2 years.
Yeah, I had a great launch at Glass Bookshop, an amazing bookstore in Edmonton.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
What kind of obstacles do you face in writing a book and how do you overcome them?
Obstacles, is that it? Obstacles faced, and how do you overcome them? Okay, all right. It's fairly simple, right?
Yeah, like
no obstacles.
Yeah, just I think the biggest one was it's because it's fairly cheap to write a book. You just need like a laptop, and so so I've got a really crappy like a 2008 refurbished MacBook Pro or whatever. Like it's not fancy, and every time I try to update Word, like it won't do it because I don't have the right software or whatever. But I would just say that voice in your, I think the biggest obstacle is like that voice in your head that's just like, man, you're a moron. Like, what are you doing? And then everybody else, you know, too, who's like, man, you're trying to write a book. Like, you're a moron. What are you doing? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it's like, it's the one thing, well, one of the things I learned from writing this book and like trying to write is like, man, it's really hard. And it's almost kind of pointless, but like, but I'm glad I did it, like, but just for myself, you know. I got the book done and I was just like, I don't even give a shit if it gets published. I don't give a shit if anybody likes it. I don't give a shit if you love it or you hate it. I got it done, so that's the only thing that mattered to me. So, yeah, as I say, nobody knew me, so, yeah.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Jessica.
I think the biggest obstacle for me, I mean, I think writing a book actually it costs a lot. It costs a lot of because you like if resources as time, you know, it takes a lot of time, and you need to have time to be able to do it, and so yeah, I think the obstacle was time. It was, you know, money, because I couldn't not work to have more time. I couldn't sacrifice working in order to have more time. So yeah, so I think it was just that. It was capitalism was my obstacle. But 5 years later, it happened. So we overcame.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're okay. I'm getting off with our heads now, everyone. Thanks for coming. So thank you. I was so excited reading through these books, and so excited that I get to talk to both of you this evening. And everyone now has to go. If you don't already own them, buy the books. The table's over there. Jorge will probably tell you a little bit more, but thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for chatting with me.
Thank you so much, Carleigh, Jessica, Nick, and it was wonderful to have you all here. Our friends from Black Bond and Book Warehouse are here selling books, and there's going to be a book signing in those tables over there, so you can buy your book there and line up right there to get the book signed. Before I let you go, I'm going to tell you very quickly about 3 amazing things that are happening here, because some of you have never been here. So the first one is on February 2nd, next week, we're hosting an opera concert on the 8th floor. So the folks from the Vancouver Opera are going to come here and give us a taste of their new production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's going to be on the 8th floor, so free. Just come, enjoy some amazing opera. The next day, on February 3rd, we're kicking off our Black History Month events with a day of film screenings. So we have a beautiful film theater up there, and we're going to screen 3 films that showcase Black joy and achievement, including a documentary about Nichelle Nichols and her quest to increase the amount of Black astronauts in NASA. So come to that on Saturday, February the 3rd. And then on February the 8th, as Leslie already said, we have the next Incite event with Jen Suk-Fong Lee. Woo! So I hope you can come back. I hope to see you again. And for more information, come talk to me or to my colleague Candy in the corner, or look at that table over there. That's all I got. You're free to go buy books and get your book signed. Have a good night. Woo!